Okay, so we've got the TMG publishing rule working for Outlook Web App, but we need to just do some additional configurations to get it working for all of the client access server services. So I'm just going to open up that rule again, and we'll just jump up here to the Paths tab. Okay, so by default that Outlook Web App publishing rule added a couple of virtual directories for us. We just need to go ahead and add some more. The first one I'm going to add is for the offline address book. Also want RPC, so that's for Outlook Anywhere. EWS, which is for Exchange Web Services. Auto Discover, which is of course for Auto Discover. And then finally Microsoft Server ActiveSync, which is of course for ActiveSync. Okay, I think I've got them all, so let's have a look now and run that test again and see if all of our authentication settings, etc., match up for those. Let's just apply that change first, test the rule. Okay, and we've got two failures there for the EWS and for the OAB virtual directories, and that's probably going to be the same on both servers because they're both configured the same. So let's jump back to SID EX1 and open up the Exchange Management Shell and have a look at the OAB virtual directory on SID EX1 to begin with, and we'll just select basic authentication. We can see that at the moment that's set to false, so just remember that in that web publishing rule we're using basic authentication for the authentication delegation. So we need to make sure that matches up on all of the virtual directories that rule is publishing. So here basic authentication is not enabled, and that's why the OAB virtual directory is failing in that test. And if we have a look at the web services virtual directory on SID EX1 as well, we'll probably find that the same is true. So basic authentication set to false. So in both those cases we just need to update those to allow basic authentication. Now those virtual directories can't be administered through the management console, so you will need to make this change in the shell, and it's quite simple. So we just set OAB virtual directory on SID EX1 and set basic authentication to true. And we'll make the same setting to SID EX2, which is the other client access server that I'm publishing. Okay, now we'll do the set web services virtual directories as well. And make the same change for SID EX2 as well. Alright, let's go back to TMG and just run that test again, see what happens this time. Alright, so that's all green ticks this time. No problems at all. So I can close that off and apply that rule change. And we should be pretty much good to go. Now as far as testing this is concerned, we can use the Exchange Remote Connectivity Analyzer to see if all those services are working externally. And just before we do that, I'll actually jump back into the rule, and I'll just add one extra thing that I forgot, which is here in the public name tab of the publishing rule. We also need to add in the Auto Discover name because remember that some clients will be connecting to Exchange using AutoDiscover to set themselves up and configure their settings. So we need to make sure that that's also in there. I'll just apply that change as well. Okay, now it is important that you have a public DNS record, which you may already have from previous lessons, for the public names that you're choosing to publish through your Forefront TMG, if you want to do the tests using the Exchange Remote Connectivity Analyzer. So I've already got those configured in my public DNS, so I'll jump over to one of my client machines and we'll run the Remote Connectivity Analyzer and just test those that the publishing rule is working for all of those services. Alright, so here we are on one of the client machines connected to the testexchangeconnectivity.com website. So in theory, if we choose to run the Outlook AutoDiscover test, that should manage to auto-discover successfully, and I'll just try that out now with Alan Reed. I'm using my own certificates issued from my own CA, so I'm going to have to tell the Remote Connectivity Analyzer to ignore SSL trust issues in this case. I'll just accept the disclaimer and I'll see if I can get the captcha correct on the first go. Okay, we're good to go. We'll run that test and just see what happens. Connectivity test successful. So let's jump back to the firewall and have a look in the logs, and we'll just see if we can see those hits from the Remote Connectivity Analyzer. Run a fresh query for the last hour. So we can see that external IP address belonging to the Remote Connectivity Analyzer website. That's hitting the firewall. So we know the DNS is working, the firewall rule is working on the TMG for publishing those services. So let's jump back to the PC and perhaps try some of the other services and see if they're all working as well. Let's try ActiveSync, for example. Once again, I need to ignore trust. Okay, the ActiveSync connectivity test was also successful, so doing pretty well here. Let's do one more test and we'll just see what happens with Outlook Anywhere. Do these tests a few times, you'll start getting sick of typing in those logon details. Okay, accept the disclaimer. Alright, now the Outlook Anywhere test has failed. So one of the great things about this Remote Connectivity Analyzer is you can drill down and have a look at exactly where that test failed. So auto-discover to the default, yeah, that's fine. Okay, we had an SSL trust issue because the auto-discover test didn't let us ignore trust. And unfortunately we can't really work around that issue when it comes to the Outlook Anywhere test. One other thing I will point out is that Outlook Anywhere is not a service that is enabled by default on client access servers. So if you have your TMG configured and you want to test Outlook Anywhere using a proper Outlook client, perhaps that is a member of your test lab domain or that trusts the certificate that you used for your test lab, you can go into the Exchange Management Console, just choose this Client Access Server Configuration section, highlight your client access servers and enable Outlook Anywhere, and then just plug in your external hostname, choose the authentication method which will align with your web publishing rules, so that's basic in my case. And that's done, and you just get a warning here that client access server won't actually pick up that configuration for anywhere up to about 15 minutes because it just polls for those configuration changes on a regular basis. Make sure you do that on both of your servers so that they're configured the same way. So that's basically it. That's just a quick rundown of configuring a Forefront TMG server to publish Exchange Server 2010. You can see that there's quite a lot of customization that can be performed on that rule. Quite a lot of settings in there. Feel free to go in there and explore some of those settings. Look at the documentation on TechNet that explains what they do. You can play around with them, break your rule, see if you can fix it again. And generally discover that as long as you've got all of your settings correctly configured in the rule to line up with what's happening on your actual client access servers, that everything works pretty well. So you can feel free to tinker around with that, play around with the logs. If you want to, you can export the policy before you start playing with it, so you can just import the policy again if you completely break it. But unfortunately TMG is no longer going to be sold by Microsoft. They'll be taking it off the market very soon. However, you will still find it out there in the real world in production environments for customers who already have it. So spending a little bit of time in here learning how to use it is probably worth your while.